Hey there, econ students. Always good to start with some tea. So today we're going to talk about interventionism. We've been talking about in past lessons a free market. That was the first section of the book, capitalism, and the merits of it. The second section of the book we talked about socialism, the failure of socialism, both in theory and both history. Today we're talking about interventionism. Now, interventionism is the idea broadly that the government can come in, turn the dials on the economy, kind of adjust the economy, lower the interest rate, raise the interest rate, increase the quantity of money, shrink the quantity of money, which does all those things with interest rates, and therefore just kind of control things and rather than let the market run by itself. There was a British economist by the name of John Maynard Keynes who in the 1930s really believed that it was proper and sometimes necessary for the federal government to come in and to make some changes into the economy rather than just let the market run by itself. All right, we'll study John Maynard Keynes. We'll do a reading and a paper on him here soon. But lesson 17, this is called price controls regarding a type of intervention. Now, price controls, we're just going to keep it really simple. There's what we call price ceilings and price floors. A price ceiling means that prices for things can only go so high. And then they hit a ceiling, they hit the roof, they stop. They can't go any higher. Okay, now this is, again, government intervention, not free market. Government intervention says the price can only go so high, and then it must stop. Okay, and the thinking behind price controls is to help people out. When prices seem to be really, really rising, that price controls are going to help people because we're going to limit how much something will cost. One of the biggest examples, most popular examples in price controls would be like rent control. And this was played out more like in cities like Chicago and New York and so on, larger cities. But the idea behind rent control was that the government said you can only allow your rent to be this high in this area. This is the ceiling. This is the most you can charge. That way, affordable housing is affordable for people who can't afford that high of rent. All right? So that's another price ceiling. Might be like on gasoline prices. If all of a sudden gas starts rising $4, $5 a gallon, and we've never really seen $5 a gallon here, but we have seen in the mid-4s that the government would come in and say, you got to put a ceiling. You cannot sell gas at any prices higher than this. Now, price ceilings, and I'm going to show you this in a minute on a chart, but price ceilings actually have the opposite effect that they're intended to. In fact, that's the one thing about economics that I hope you realize is that there's intentions are good, but you want to look at the consequences, the outcomes of those intentions. Because if we're not getting what we intend, then why should we continue to do that which we've done? So price controls, price ceilings actually end up hurting people. And here's an example why. Let's say you have a natural disaster. A hurricane comes through, wipes out all the power in the city and so on. Water becomes a scarce commodity. And of course, the idea, and what happens in these types of things is a term called price gouging. Price gouging is when people know you're in an area, they know you need something, and so they'll raise the price really, really, really high. You know, go to a professional sports, you know, and buy a bottle of pop or a hot dog. I mean, $3 for a hot dog. Come on, but they know you'll pay because you're there. You know, and so, but price gouging would be more in terms of a natural disaster where you need something. You should be entitled to this water, but they're charging you $4 a bottle, $5 a bottle for water. And so the government might come in and say, no, 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 there's a hurricane, we had a disaster here, we're going to cut the price. You cannot charge any more than $1 a bottle of water. Well, the problem with that is, what will happen is, first come, first serve. Those who get to the water first will buy up, and they'll buy all the water that they can possibly buy, okay, because it's at this low price. And so people who come a little bit later, they won't have water. So you see, that's a policy that is intended on helping people. It doesn't, the actual result is it doesn't. So that's, and rent control is very similar. And I'm going to show you that in a minute on a chart. Now, those are what we call price ceilings, where the government comes in and says, you can only charge this much. You can't charge any more. A price floor is where the government comes in and says they should be able to sell their goods and their services at these prices. Therefore, here's the minimum, here's the lowest price. They can't drop their price below this amount. It's called a price floor. The most common one that's used in discussions is minimum wage, at least here in the States. Minimum wage. The idea is that minimum wage is $10 an hour. The idea is I can't hire anybody for less than $10 an hour. That's the minimum wage. And so you can't, if you have not very, your education, you lack education, your skill set might be lower, and that's often true with young people. They haven't got enough time and experience in the workforce to generate a higher wage. They're very inexperienced. But you can't hire them at $8 an hour or $9 an hour if the government has said the minimum wage is $10 an hour. And so what happens is you end up with a surplus of workers, meaning a bunch of people standing around unemployed because they can't be hired, because there's a minimum wage in place. That's what we call a price floor. Now, I'm going to spin the camera around here and let me just show you both on a chart price ceiling and price floor. All right? Now, try not to knock the camera off the stand. There we go. So, again, price here on this axis, quantity supplied or demanded on this axis. Our demand line goes down to the right, our supply goes up and to the right. You've learned this. This came from lesson 11. So let's talk. Let's talk about price ceilings. Price ceilings, rent control. All right, and we'll use that. Let's say that the market price, the equilibrium, and remember that's the market price. That's where the amount demanded and the amount supplied, they come together, they're in agreement. This is the general market price, $800 a month for an apartment. But the government has said, no, we need to make apartments affordable for people. Not everybody can afford $800 a month, so the legal amount that you can charge is $650. So here's $650, and you will see at the current market price of $800, where equilibrium is, we're providing about 400 apartments are available for rent. Now, at $650, you can see that the demand line and the supply line, they don't come together. You can see that many people would sign up for $650 a month. It looks like 450 people would sign up for apartments. But because of the lower amount, not as many people are willing to supply apartments. You can see the supply line at 650 is just a little over 200. So basically, what has happened is there's 200 less apartments available for rent at 650 than 800. That's 200 apartments fewer available. That has not helped people, okay? That has hurt people, because now there's not only people, well, we can't afford this. Well, now, guess what? There's not even any available. People are not going to rent. And the reason that landlords, that rent control is a bad thing is that the margin for a business person, for an entrepreneur, to make on that profitability that they make on the apartments, they use that money to oftentimes put it back in to their building, to put it back in to make things nice and to keep the customers happy, all right? But what happens is when rent control comes through and you have a lower amount, then what happens is for those that do come in and supply apartments at $650, they're not making as much money, so money does not flow back into the apartments as readily, and so those improvements on the apartments isn't going to happen, and you end up with rundown apartments. And you see that all the time in large cities like New York City or Chicago, or maybe Detroit. And so that's the consequence of what we call a price ceiling. Now, let's talk about maybe a price floor with the term minimum wage. All right, let me just kind of erase this here and redo my diagram here a bit. So, a price floor says like that. Let's say the current minimum wage, I think I'm just going to say it's $9 an hour. I can never keep track of it. It's $9 an hour. So at $9 an hour, all right, we have 400 people available working at $9 an hour. You can see where the supply line, the demand line come together. Now, with a price floor, it says you can't charge $9 an hour. The new minimum wage is, we want to be like everybody else. We want to be at $15 an hour, all right? Oops. So at $15 an hour, it's going to look like this. Well, here's what's happened. At $15 an hour, many people, you can see, we had 400 people supplying their services at $9 an hour. At $15 an hour, about 500 people are willing to work for 15 bucks an hour. Sure, raise them. Yeah, that sounds like a great plan. But if you're the employer, if you're the entrepreneur, that might not be as easy for you, and so you're only willing to employ 200 people at $15 an hour. And so you have what we call, if you remember, anything above equilibrium is called surplus. And so what we have is we have, by establishing a price floor, meaning this is now the lowest price. You can't go any lower. You can't go down to $9 an hour. You can only go down to $15 an hour, or you can pay more if you want. But the legal amount at $15, what it does is it creates a surplus, all right? A surplus of 200, over here, 500. You've got 300 people who are now unemployed because they don't have the skills needed to command a $15 an hour wage. And so that's another example of how an intention and then the actual result turned out to be two different things. And these are laws that they're trying to help people, but what they actually do is they hurt the very ones they're intended to help, okay? That's intervention regarding price controls